Welcome food fans, picky eaters, the flavor curious, and everyone in between. Nothing makes good food better than good conversation, and your table is ready. Welcome back to another episode of the Food For ThoughtCast with your hosts, Melissa Reagan and Steven Gonzalez, but you can call them Chef. All right, let's get this episode started.
Hey there, food fans. Welcome back to the Food for ThoughtCast with me, your host, Melissa Reagan, and my co-host with the most, Chef Steven Gonzalez, is not able to be with us today. You see, despite the fact that we make millions and millions, maybe thousands and thousands, I don't know, tens and tens of dollars of revenue from this podcast, or actually zero at all. Steve and I both have real jobs, but I really want to commit this year to bringing you all the tasty content that you've grown accustomed to and that you deserve, even in the weeks where Steve and I can't get together to record. So I hope that you enjoy what I'm going to call a solo snack with just me. Today, I want to have a conversation about fried chicken. It really just has a really rich history in the United States. It's a huge part of Southern food culture. But first, I want to start off with exploring the different types of fried chicken from around the world. So I don't know what your preference is when it comes to fried chicken. Mine is I like it very crispy and a little bit spicy. I like gravy with my fried chicken. I know that some people really enjoy fried chicken with mac and cheese. There's the old debate of white versus dark meat. I think it's drumsticks or nothing, to be quite honest with you. I like a thigh leg combination as well, but really it's drumsticks if I'm eating fried chicken. Of course, we're going to go to the good old US of A and examine Southern fried chicken first. Usually this is marinated in buttermilk. There's no shortage of fried chicken restaurants all throughout the South and really throughout the entirety of the United States. But a lot of times we see chicken tenders. These are the tenderloins that come off of the breast right behind that rib meat. Usually there's a little tendon in there that you can easily take out with just a fork and a kitchen towel, or like a fork and a paper towel. You can even use the back of a knife. I'm team no tendon. I don't like chewy, unidentified, weird things that have the texture of rubber bands to be in my chicken tenderloins. So really not a fan of that. Team no tendon all the way. If anybody's not cleaning these before they eat them, it's just wild. That's absolutely crazy work, as the kids would say. So Southern fried chicken is usually parts and pieces of the bird. So usually the chicken is broken down into its components, right? You have the chicken breast, you've got the wings, and you've got the thighs, and then you have the drumsticks. So typically, at the fast food chains that serve fried chicken, or the sit down places, you're going to have your choice of white and dark meat, or you're going to have maybe the option to order a combination of both. Typically in the South, you're going to see the fried chicken marinated in buttermilk first. The reason for this is that the acid in the buttermilk helps to tenderize the chicken, and it really helps to give it a lot of flavor. Really the key to anything that you're deep frying, and if you have like multiple components, so we'll talk about the breading stages and styles in just a minute, but the key to this coming out really flavorful is seasoning every single stage of the process. So that means that the marinade that you use for the chicken is seasoned. That means that the wet batter that you're going to use for the fried chicken is seasoned on its own, and that the dry ingredients are seasoned as well. You might think that it's going to end up salty by the end of the process, but it's really, really important that you have, every single component seasoned well so that you build layers of flavor. I know that we've talked about this before in other cooking methods. So essentially, when you want to look at the history of fried chicken in the South, there's no doubt that it's just inextricably linked to African-American history and the chapter of slavery in the United States. But there is a really strong likelihood that as the Europeans moved into the United States and started also being involved in the slave trade. There's a lot of evidence there that says that the Scottish settlers that made their home, at that time before it was the United States of America, in other words, but when they settled that land, there's a lot of evidence there that they brought their cooking style with them as far as fried chicken is concerned. So one of the oldest cookbook recipes from the 1740s that deals with fried chicken coming out of Europe references this cooking style that was used in Scotland. And it's basically like a wet batter. It's probably the closest thing that we would understand to being like a beer batter today, but it's really interesting. It's really, really similar to the fried chicken that we would have seen coming out of the South at that time. The biggest difference being that they're using like the 3-step method, or sometimes when you fry chicken in a pan or when you're shallow frying chicken, there's only dry ingredients involved. Like you're using a seasoned flour and you not necessarily double coating it. I like a double coated piece of fried chicken. I think it helps keep it crispier. And honestly, from a science perspective, I think it helps insulate the chicken from being burned or getting extra greasy. So when you create those layers of coating and breading on the pieces of chicken, it just makes it more sturdy. It can just stand up to the cooking process. We can also look at buffalo wings and chicken tenders and so-called boneless wings. Really, let's call them what they are. They're nuggets, but they can be a part of this conversation too. So this is a staple of, football tailgates, sports bars, of course, and then with buffalo wings coming from Anchor Bar, being made famous by Anchor Bar in Buffalo, but they have no relation whatsoever to the animal buffalo, but usually in its classic form, you're going to find this with buffalo sauce. It's a combination of spicy red peppers, butter, and then hot sauce. Usually you add a little bit of honey in there to balance it out. But if you're eating wings at places where you know that they're a little bit breaded, you can think of it as a tiny form of fried chicken, right? Essentially in 1964, and we covered this on our appetizers and like party foods episode, but essentially in 1964, Teresa Bellissimo at the Anchor Bar in Buffalo, New York, they had all these chicken parts that were going to go bad, and so they wanted to make money off of them, and that's kind of how the legend goes. So they originally served them with blue cheese and celery. So I think that nuggets belong in a conversation about fried chicken. I think it's a really important like part of American food culture, if nothing else. And so we can talk about nuggets. We can talk about tenders. We can certainly talk about buffalo wings. They're not really breaded in the traditional sense of the word, like the 3-step breading process where you go dry, wet, dry. That kind of makes it more fried chicken. But let's go over to Japan really quickly. So we have a couple of different types of fried chicken in Japan, a couple of different presentations. So the most famous is karaage. So karaage is undoubtedly one of my brother's favorite ways to eat fried chicken, but you'll find it in izakaya restaurants. So izakaya is a fun word to say that really refers to this style of the meal that you're eating. So it's a lot of small courses. You might get this as an appetizer. So essentially you're going to use bite-sized pieces of chicken thighs. They're usually marinated in soy sauce and sake, which is a type of rice wine, mirin, which is a rice wine, and a rice wine vinegar, but it comes in both forms, and then different types of seasonings. And this is used to tenderize the meat. So salt is a really great tenderizer for meat, as is alcohol, as is acid. The only thing that when you want to watch out for when you're marinating any type of meat is if you get too much acid in there, it'll actually start to cook the meat. And unless you're making a ceviche, which uses acid to kind of, partially cook the meat, that's not really what you're going for, because eventually if you put too much acid with the meat, it's going to make the meat tough. But you can temper this process with a couple of other things in the marinade, and then you can just create like a really flavorful marinade for the meat. The pieces come out of this marinade and they're coated in either wheat flour or potato starch, and then they're deep fried. Usually served with Kewpie mayo and lemon. It's kind of like their take on aioli, right? Kewpie mayo or Kewpie mayonnaise. You might have heard this referred to in other applications, maybe it's like Japanese mayonnaise, but essentially regular mayonnaise has a little bit of white vinegar in it. Kewpie mayo or Kewpie mayonnaise is made with rice wine vinegar. It just has a different flavor profile. I think it's really good for these type of applications. It has just a little bit of sweetness. Usually they'll add a little bit of MSG or dashi powder as well. But yeah, it has like a tangy and slightly sweet flavor. I think it's a really great thing to have in your pantry if you want to experiment. So usually this would be enjoyed on top of like a bowl of rice and a really, crispy cold beer. This is really good for kids too, because it's not coated in sauce. It doesn't have anything that's really unapproachable in it. It's just really its own style of fried chicken. And then we make our way to Korea. So the Korean fried chicken is quite a bit different. It probably looks the most recognizable to us when we compare it to hot wings. So these pieces, usually they're bone-in. They're battered in flour and potato starch. So potato starch is very similar to like instant mashed potatoes or like potato powder, but it's really just the starch that's been extracted and then pulverized into this powder. It makes a really great ingredient when you're trying to get something crispy or trying to just add like some body. These are double fried. This is what differentiates this from regular like Southern fried chicken or the karaage that we just discussed. This is fried twice. And the reason that it's fried twice is because it has to stand up to a really thick sauce, almost a paste. So these get tossed in a sauce that is made out of ketchup, usually garlic, ginger, a couple of different spices, gochugaru, which is like a red pepper blend that's popular in Korean cooking, and then gochujang, which is a fermented red chili paste. If you've never had Korean fried chicken, I really encourage you to try it. You're in for a big treat. It is delicious. If you don't like spice, a lot of times you can find a place that'll offer it to you in a range of spiciness, but it is insanely good. Next, we have to go to Taiwan. So Yansuji is a bite-sized fried chicken snack. It was a street food that became popular in the 1970s there. So the Western version of this is definitely popcorn chicken. Popcorn chicken became popular in the early 90s. KFC made it really popular. Sonic came along with their own version, and Popeyes offered it for a little while. Popcorn chicken is essentially tiny nuggets. It's baby nugs, right? So these are smaller chicken pieces in this Taiwanese dish that are marinated in a few different spices and then rice wine. So there's that acid component again to help tenderize the chicken. Because I don't know about you, but I'm team dark meat all the way. If you're going to fry chicken breast, you really need to do something to add moisture and flavor to it first, because it doesn't have any fat to support that. It has very little fat of its own, which is what makes it so healthy. It's a really great source of protein, but it does need a little bit of help in the flavor department, okay? So you're marinating in spices and rice wine, and then it gets coated in sweet potato starch. So that's a completely different flavor component, but I think it makes it really interesting. Honestly, I've never had this, but after researching it, I really want to try it. The dish is finished with a dusting of 5-spice powder and then Szechuan pepper, chili powder, fried basil leaves, and fried garlic. This sounds insanely delicious. So it's usually served in paper bags. So you can just eat it on the go and it's not messy. And there's two things I really, really love. That's fried food and convenience, and something that's efficient. So this sounds like a winner to me. This brings us over to China. We're going to talk about Cantonese crispy chicken. So everybody's probably familiar with the crispy fried chickeny bits that you get in sweet and sour chicken, the very popular like Americanized take on the Cantonese style chicken. The traditional fried chicken is just a little bit different. So they really reserve this for holidays. It's a very old style of making fried chicken. It takes several hours. So they approach this just a little bit differently. Instead of using raw chicken and marinating it, they steam it first. And I'll tell you why this is a really, really familiar process to us, even though it sounds like it's something crazy, right? So first they steam the chicken, then they let it dry over a few hours. So they let it air dry. What they're doing is they want to make sure that the edges can get just as dry as possible. And it kind of forms this pellicle, if you will. It's a really fancy word that just kind of means like a hardened skin. So we look for things like a pellicle when we smoke meats, when we are drying out meats, when we're doing something like jerky, it really changes the texture of the edge and the outside. So once it's dried properly, then they deep fry it and they rotate it really, really often. So what this means is that no side ever gets darker than the other. And then once it forms a golden crust all over, that constant turning in the hot oil is going to enable that process. And once it gets the golden crust all over, they sprinkle sugar and vinegar over it. So really, really hitting that salty sweet and the sweet and sour. So that's like the real sweet and sour, the OG sweet and sour. Now, the reason why you might be familiar with this and you didn't really know about it is because when KFC came on the scene, they started this method that they called broasting. They actually copyrighted the term. Okay. So when they initially started selling their fried chicken, they used a pressure cooker to start mass producing and making the process faster. So once they started franchising the restaurants and they figured out how they could do this efficiently and that it would make money, they started broasting it. So they call it this process where they're combining broiling and roasting. But the reality is neither one of those things are actually taking place. It's just one of those words that kind of became commonplace and nobody really considered that it's a misnomer. But what they do is they use the pressure cooker to steam and cover the chicken so that it's tender. Instead of using like a meat tenderizer, I'm sure they have their 13 herbs and spices, but instead of using like a traditional meat tenderizer or like a buttermilk soak, they're using the steam and the heat that builds inside the pressure cooker, and they're cooking it in oil at the same time. So eventually the steam slow releases, the oil helps to crisp up the outside. So the first part of the cooking process makes sure that the chicken is cooked all the way through and stays tender and moist. And the second part really crisps up the outside. This is incredibly fascinating to me because it seems like two steps that wouldn't work at the same time. But here we are. They've made it super famous, and obviously it works because they have the business and the sales to prove it. All right. So if you go to Indonesia and Malaysia, they have ayam goreng, which is just literally translates to fried chicken. These are street foods. This is my apologies. This is a popular street food that's found across both of these regions. It came about in the mid 20th century. And this style of fried chicken is unique because it's marinated and pre-cooked in a broth. So this is braised before it's fried. We've talked about braising before in a cooking methods episode from a couple of years back. If you've been listening to the Food for ThoughtCast for that long, I really thank you for following and supporting this show. But to prepare this chicken, they pre-cook it in an aromatic broth before frying. So there's a little bit of lemongrass in there, some tamarind, some seeds, some spices. They make a paste with shallots, garlic, galangal, which is very, very similar to ginger, just a little bit different flavor profile. You'll find that it's a little bit tart. Turmeric, coriander seed, sugar, and tamarind paste. Tamarind is a really, really interesting pod. It's very similar to cacao in the way that it grows and the way that it's used, but tamarind paste is it has that spicy raisin quality, kind of like ancho chili, but don't think heat in this case. You can think more sour. If you've never tried it, I think it's a really interesting flavor that everybody should try at least once in their life. The broth is made of this paste that's been prepared, lemongrass stalks, and then bay leaves, but the Indonesian kind, okay? So then the turmeric, I don't know if you've ever used it, but it will dye everything that it comes into contact with. You can never hide the fact that you've been using turmeric. It's going to turn you yellow. It's going to turn your hands yellow. It's kind of like if you cut beets without gloves on. You're going to be scarred and stained for life. It takes a lot of scrubbing to get those pigments out of your skin. But I digress. So after they cook the chicken in this broth, it has this yellow tint from the turmeric. And then the meat, the chicken itself, absorbs all the flavors from the paste and the lemongrass and the bay leaves. And then it's kind of soft. And then they deep fry it immediately after. So there's no drying process in between, right? They're not trying to do anything special to the outside of the chicken. They're going to let the oil handle that. And then it's served with lime and chili paste. This chili paste is what you know as sambal oelek. It is the very spicy stuff that you've probably seen in like a clear and green, either plastic or glass jar. If you like chili crisp, it's very similar to that. In fact, it's probably a component in your favorite chili crisp that you buy. But sambal is extremely strong. It looks like they're using it straight here. It sounds amazing. So ayam goreng is this blanket term for fried chicken, and there's all sorts of regional versions, not unlike what we have in the United States, right? So Southern fried chicken is usually made by single or double breading chicken pieces and then pan frying. In other parts of the country, you might see this deep fried. In some parts of the country, you might see foods described as chicken fried. Usually that's a boneless beef steak. So usually that is cube steak, which is a tenderized, it's cut off the chuck. There's no cube shaped part of a cow, just in case anybody out there was listening. The way that we name foods is just ridiculous sometimes, but I digress. So it's usually like a tenderized piece of steak that's coming from like the shoulder or the chuck. But when somebody says that they've chicken fried something, they usually mean it's shallow fried. I have worked in places that made their chicken fried steak in a deep fryer. I don't think either way is wrong, but usually if you hear something described as chicken fried, it's been shallow fried. The reason being that really, the history supports the fact that cast iron skillets were used. Cast iron skillets in Dutch ovens, and you don't fully have to submerge the food in the oil for it to be considered pan fried or shallow fried or chicken fried. And so that's kind of like the discerning difference there. All right, so over in India, we have this chicken called Chicken 65. It has a varied origin story, but the story goes that it was created at the Buhari Hotel in 1965. So, the story has kind of evolved from the time that it was created. It was the theories range all the way from the chicken being cut into 65 pieces or marinated for 65 days, or it was number 65 on the menu, or that there's 65 ingredients. But honestly, it's because it was invented in 1965. And the way that it's made is it is boneless chicken that they marinate in spices and yogurt. So really not unlike butter chicken, okay? But they do pat some of this marinade off before they go to the next step, and they dust it in rice flour. So really, really similar to something that's tempura fried. Now, tempura is a light batter that's usually made with ice water and rice flour, or maybe sometimes tapioca flour. It makes a really light, crisp batter and doesn't get really dark. Because the batter is so thin and it's so light in its viscosity and weight, the reason it doesn't get dark when you fry it is because you don't have to cook it as long. So in this case, they dust these boneless pieces that they marinated in spices and yogurt in rice flour, and then they deep fry them. So when we're deep frying something, you're submerging it in the oil or lard or tallow or whatever you're using, right? And then they finish it with Kashmiri green chilies. Those are hot. Minced garlic and curry leaves. Curry leaves are interesting. You can eat them or not eat them. I don't like actually consuming the leaves. I like using them as a flavoring. It's not quite as harmful as if you say eat a bay leaf on accident. That's a terrible thing you never want to do. Okay. But to be fair, nobody should be leaving a bay leaf in anything where you can find it. But if they do, you shouldn't go back there. Then let's go just a little bit north, right? Ukraine and Russia. We have chicken Kiev. Chicken Kiev, you've probably seen it on a Luby's buffet, maybe a holiday menu, maybe a catering menu. Maybe you've seen it in frozen dinner form. This is very, very close to a schnitzel. So schnitzel is a German frying method where you pound a cutlet really thin, okay? And it is a 3-step breading method, okay? So sometimes pork, sometimes chicken. You pound this boneless, skinless cutlet extremely thin, and then it's a triple breaded item. So it's usually going to start with a dry, which could be a seasoned flour. It's going to go to a wet, which could be milk or eggs or egg white batter, or it could be a little bit of both milk and eggs. And then it's going to get breadcrumbs afterward. All right. Chicken Kiev, used to be served to dignitaries in Moscow. And chicken Kiev kind of had its comeuppance in the United States in the 80s and 90s as a frozen convenience food. So that's why I say you've probably seen it like in a Stouffer's frozen dinner at some point in your life if you've ever eaten it in a restaurant. So you pound the chicken breast fillet. So what is the difference between a chicken breast and a chicken breast fillet? Maybe you've wondered, maybe you've never cared. Even if you don't care, I'm going to tell you. A chicken breast is like the full chicken breast. When we say that something is a fillet and we're talking about chicken, it's usually been cut in half, okay? Which is really helpful in this instance because if it's smaller and thinner, you'll have less time to spend pounding it flat and it'll cook faster, okay? So you make the chicken Kiev by pounding a chicken breast fillet out flat and then rolling it around cold butter. So the best way to do this is going to be to take your seasoned compound cold butter and freeze it first so that it doesn't all ooze out of the middle. And then you coat that rolled up fillet around the butter. You coat it with egg and breadcrumb. So this is a 2-step breading. This is 2 steps, right? Your egg wash and then breadcrumbs, and then it gets deep fried, okay? So NPR thinks that this was the ultimate Eastern European comfort food, and that it has ties to French cooking because in the 19th century, the Russian aristocrats became fascinated with French cuisine and would send their chefs to Paris. And if anybody doesn't know, Parisians are, and the French, largely are credited with developing the classic culinary technique as we know it today. So the Parisians would use a veal cutlet. The Russians would use chicken. Eventually, this was a dish that was served when the Soviet Union existed. They would serve it at state dinners. And then following World War II, it got popular in restaurants in New York. And so they nicknamed it and renamed it Chicken Kiev. They think, the predominant theory being to attract Russian and Ukrainian immigrants that had settled in New York and the surrounding areas. So the Ukrainian chefs make this a little bit differently. They don't add cheese or garlic or parsley. Those are things that the Americans have added over time. But literally, it was a butter-stuffed fried chicken breast. And whatever way that you want to say that it got popular or, whatever way you want to say it came into existence, like I will, yes, please eat meat stuffed with butter. It sounds amazing. All right, so we go to Austria. Austria's take on fried chicken is a dish that was once reserved for the upper class. So this became a specialty in the 18th century. It's called Backhandel. And it's made by rubbing a small chicken all over with lemon juice and seasoning, which, based on everything that I know about Viennese and Austrian, cooking, I don't think it's well seasoned. I mean, maybe that's shots fired, but I assume in this case that it's like salt, pepper, onion, garlic, maybe. Maybe if the pepper's not too spicy, right? So you can fry chicken pieces for this, or you can leave it whole and then debone the chicken and flatten it out. But whichever way you decide to do this, in this traditional recipe, the pieces are dipped in egg wash and then flour and then breadcrumbs, okay? So egg wash, flour, and then breadcrumbs. This would be 4 steps. Flour, egg wash, flour, and then breadcrumbs. There's all sort of different ways to bread something when you're going to fry it, but it's really important to know the differences and how to make them successful, right? In its original form, traditionally, this was served with offal. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that offal is the blanket term for bits and parts, bits and pieces, tits and bits, if you will. This was traditionally served with fried chicken heart and liver. Yes, please give me a full plate of this. I don't care what you say. Listen, if you're scared to try fried organ meats, you shouldn't be. There's nothing that was ever made worse by deep frying. Just ask a Mars bar or a stick of butter or an Oreo or a Twinkie or I don't know. I rest my case. There's nothing that's ever been made worse by deep frying it. That's what I think. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. All right, let's go over to Italy. Pollo frito, that's literally Italian for fried chicken. This dish is a little bit different than the ones we've seen. They're using olive oil and lemon juice to moisturize, dear God, to marinate the chicken. to tenderize it. That's what I meant. There will be no editing. I'm leaving all the things in here. So they're using olive oil, lemon juice, and basil, oregano, garlic, onion powder, salt, and traditionally white pepper to marinate the chicken. And then it's just served with lemon slices and parsley. It's not unlike the Italian version of fried squid that you would usually see. That's just very, very simply served, very lightly breaded, very lightly fried, and then served with lemon and parsley, or maybe just lemon. So they do have a dish that's very traditional called fritto misto. That's literally Italian for a mixed fry. So you see it with calamari, and it looks like you see the same style with their chicken. Also, they do the same frying method and then the same presentation with fratelli di zucca, which is squash fritters, or everything else that they fry in Italy seems to follow this formula. And then we head down to Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, where they eat quite possibly my favorite part of the chicken. I think it deserves a place in the fried chicken conversation, but that would be the skin. Okay. Chicharrón de pollo. So literally skin of the chicken, or chicken skin. So they will cut up the thigh meat. They'll debone it and cut up the thigh meat with the skin on it. And then the chicken is marinated, sometimes with citrus, sometimes with lime. It's dredged in a seasoned flour. Dredge is a really fancy culinary word that means dip. You're just literally dipping it in seasoned flour, and then they fry it. So this is a single breading method, okay? Single breading method. It's evolved over time, especially in the Dominican Republic. They've added things like soy sauce and rum. Alcohol is another great way to tenderize meat, but it's really one of those things that a little dab will do you. If you leave meat in alcohol for too long, it will start to cook and eventually dissolve the meat. So it's really not a guessing game. You don't want to marinate something with alcohol for, I would say, more than a day, depending on how large the pieces are. Okay. You can find the influences of this dish all throughout the Caribbean and then parts of Central and South America. Usually they use a little bit more citrus heavy, marinade depending on the area, and they'll just do something that has local flavors. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about all the different breading. So we talked about the levels of breading or the stages of breading, but I want to talk about kind of like the standard words you might see in a cookbook. Maybe it's your first time frying chicken at home. Maybe you just like learning stuff. Maybe you just love listening to this podcast, whatever the reason is, right? So you cannot, contrary to popular belief, you're not going to get the same results if you just drop like a naked chicken breast into a deep fryer, okay? So the first thing that's going to happen is all the water in the chicken breast is going to rapidly look for an escape, okay? All the water is going to convert to steam. It's going to start bubbling and like spitting liquid everywhere. But the only thing that's going to happen after that is once all the moisture is out of the chicken breast, all the outer tissues are going to become really, really dry and tough. All right. So that's why you need the protectant. The protectant is the batter or the breading. So batter is usually made by combining some sort of flour or a starch, right? Rice flour, tapioca starch, wheat flour, all-purpose flour, or cornstarch with some sort of liquid. And then you really need a binder. So when we talk about binders in cooking, we're talking about things with a little bit of protein or leavening. Okay. The most common binder is typically eggs. And you want a little leavening in a batter. It doesn't matter what you're frying or what you're battering. You want a little bit of leavening to give it a little bit of a poof. Okay. So when we're baking, there's this effect that happens when you bake something called oven spring. Oven spring is the effect of the initial heat in the cooking process on whatever you're baking. So oven spring is kind of like that first little poof that happens with muffins or cake or pastries. And it happens because of the leavener. Baking powder, you might see on the can that it says double acting. That's because it can act twice. Once it's heat activated, right? Once you cook it, whatever it is. And the second time, or the first time really, it can react with the acidic ingredients. So it's if you've ever combined like a baking soda or a baking powder with vinegar, maybe you've done like a science project or a school project that was a volcano, you know what happens. Or maybe you've tried to use like baking soda and vinegar to clear a drain. All those bubbles that are created are leavener. You can think about the way that bubbles will foam and then they'll build on top of each other to make height. It makes lift, it leavens, it literally lightens. So that's why it's really important to have some sort of leavening ingredient in your batter so it's not like all heavy and gloopy, okay? So when you batter something, when you want to deep fry something, you need to create tension on the surface so that the batter will stick. You can do this a couple of ways. You can either pulverize or, make a little bit of, you can rough up the surface. I'll give you a great example. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to spray paint something that's made out of plastic. You kind of have to rough up the surface so that it will grab and hold on to the paint. Food is not all that different. So if you wanted to fry a chicken breast and you only wanted to wet batter it, you need to create the friction there so that the batter will stick. So something that's really, really helpful if you're going to batter fry something is that you need to pat dry your item, whether it's vegetables or meat. You need to pat the surface dry so that the wet will stick. The dries do the wets and the wets do the dries. It's kind of like an unwritten rule. Actually, it's probably written in 1,000 places. Like that was a silly thing to say, but it is a general rule of deep frying, right? The other way that you can create that tension, that friction, that surface that wet things will stick to is by adding a dry. So usually you use like a single really light layer of flour to make a batter stick. So that's steps 1 and 2 in a 3-step breading method, right? Then in the wet dredge, if you're not going to fry the batter directly, if you've not made a batter, but you're using like an egg wash, that's where you would go dry, wet, dry. An egg wash can literally be eggs. It gets a little bit dicey if you're only using eggs. You just need to thin it out a little bit because eggs are really viscous, okay? Once you've broken the yolk and whipped it into the whites, you really just need something to help it spread out and emulsify with each other. You can't make eggs just mixed with eggs. It's why you will see people add something like milk or a tablespoon of water or even an additional fat, like a little mayonnaise, to like scrambled eggs or a little butter or a little oil, whatever have you. But if you're creating like a wet dredge to deep fry something, you just need that wet component to be thin enough. It has to be thin. The reason being that nobody likes have you ever eaten something fried and you pull all the breading off in one bite? It's usually because it didn't stick well enough to the meat, right? Like the meat was too thick or the breading was too thick. If you're going to bread something 3 times, every stage of that breading needs to be a little bit thin so that the finished product isn't too thick. And you don't want to create air pockets. That's how the breading is going to separate from whatever it is. Like nothing makes me more upset. Well, there's a lot of things that make me more upset, but when we're talking about fried food, like one of the things that really upsets me is when you get an onion ring and you try to take one bite of it, like a crisp, clean bite, and you pull the entire onion out of the breading. It typically means that the onion was too wet when they applied the first dry, or it means that the breading itself was so thick and not applied properly that it made an air pocket. And then when the food was cooking, the oil got in that air pocket and separated the entire crust from whatever the item is. I hate when that happens. Same thing goes for a fried chicken sandwich. Same thing goes for fried chicken tenders. The same thing goes for basically fried anything. When it's not done well, it's a real bummer. When something's fried beautifully and correctly, it is one of the most delicious things in the world. Okay. So we're talking about flour dredge breading. This was going to be your 1-step process. You've marinated something. It's thin or small enough to be cooked with just a thin coating of flour. You need to make sure it's just a little bit moist to get the first coating of flour to stick. If it's the only coating, you don't have to pat it all the way dry. Remember, you need to dry the wet. Okay. We talk about breadcrumb breading. Okay. This is usually a 3-step method. Okay. This is a 3-step breading method because the breadcrumbs have a different texture and a different consistency from the eggs. Those have a different consistency from the flour, right? It takes 3 different stages to get the breadcrumbs to stick, okay? The meat is wet. You dry the wet with flour. You wet the dry with eggs. You dry the wet with breadcrumbs, okay? I know this sounds silly. It's a really easy way to remember it, especially if you're new to frying food at home. Now, something really important to note. Air fryers are incredibly popular, but they are not good for breaded items. The reason being that the air fryer basically acts like, it's essentially like a tiny convection microwave on your countertop. The only way that they work really well with breaded food is if that breaded food is cold or frozen first. But it needs to be 3 steps. Like the last step in the breading, if you're going to make something at home that's breaded and you're going to air fry it, has to be dry because there's no wet to wet the dry. The inside of the air fryer is dry. It's just hot air, essentially, right? If you beer batter something and you put it in your air fryer, you're going to be extremely disappointed. It's not going to work. You're just trying to dry the wet. You just got to dry the dry, okay? So when we're talking about something like chicken Parmesan is a really great example. Chicken, maybe you're going to pound it thin so that it will cook faster, season it or marinate it. It needs to be a little bit moist to hold the flour. Flour needs to be a really thin, dry coating to hold the egg. The egg needs to be just thin enough to make that whisper thin crust and hold the breadcrumbs, okay? Really, really important. If you're breading something, you need to have a wet hand and a dry hand. You're not trying to deep fry your own hands. They don't need a crust, okay? It's also gross. You can't touch anything else in your kitchen. You're going to end up with massive club hands that are covered in egg and flour and bits, and gross bits. You take your dry hand, you touch the wet thing, you take your wet hand, you touch the dry thing, okay? You touch the chicken, flour, put it in the eggs, you touch the eggs with the other hand, you put it back in the breadcrumbs or back in the flour, okay? My personal favorite is panko breadcrumbs. They're like a Japanese flake-style breadcrumb. It's really no offense to American or Italian-style breadcrumbs or even the ones you make from scratch. It's the texture that makes it so crispy, and really the secret to kind of that restaurant quality breadcrumb breading is whizzing them in the food processor first. This is the industry secret, right? The panko breadcrumbs have a lot of surface area. They're like flakes, but you can make it even smaller and more consistent by just putting it through the food processor or the blender, okay? Beer batter. I absolutely adore beer batter on something like cod or even catfish, okay? Really, really important. The fish is moist. You dry the wet. So you make a little bit of a dredge. It's tapioca starch. It's potato starch. It's corn starch for really, really crispy. Or it's flour. Then you shake all the flour off. Dip it into the beer batter. This is not something you can prep ahead. It needs to go straight in that beer batter. Just a little gentle. You're not really shaking it. It's kind of like you're just letting the last little bits of it drip off back into the same vat of batter. And then it needs to be deep fried. Okay. Beer batter and getting to do it right and doing it right every single time is one of those great things in life. Okay. It doesn't get as crispy as breadcrumbs or other flour does, but the batter is delicious and it's so good on things like fried fish and onion rings. Then we talk about tempura. Tempura is a really easy thing to make at home, even if you're entry level or you consider yourself like just a home cook or maybe even a novice. Tempura is a really beautiful thing to make at home. Now, one of the things you want to do when you're frying at home is use the thermometer. In the business, we have the great advantage of having digital thermometers all over the place and having deep fryers that will maintain the right temperature and tell us exactly what the temperature is at all times. You can always use a Fry Daddy. It's going to do the same thing. But if you're frying on the stove, you just want to be obviously very careful. It's like a huge vat of hot oil. And then you want to be extremely cautious in kind of, a candy thermometer is really great for this. It's something that clips onto the side of the oil. You just don't want the oil to start smoking because you don't want your stuff to burn. And you also don't want to start a grease fire. So Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little solo snack. There'll be some more of these in the future. We really want to make sure that you have Food for ThoughtCast content every single week. That is the goal for 2026. Make sure you rate, review, or subscribe. Make sure you're following us at the Food for ThoughtCast on Instagram and Facebook. Remember, you are what makes the show great. Steve and I will be back next week. We have a couple of guests in the pipeline that I think you're really going to enjoy. And for now, I'm hungry for fried chicken, so I'm going to go find it. Gotta go. Bye. That's a wrap for today. Until the next episode of the Food for ThoughtCast, make good food, eat good food, share it, and be kind to one another.
Thanks so much for listening today. You are part of what makes us special, and we are so glad you joined us. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. Just like food, delicious podcasts are better when you share them with others. Come back for seconds wherever podcasts are served, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Food for ThoughtCast.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at the Food for ThoughtCast or at www.foodforthoughtcast.com, where you can link to all podcast players, or you can send us an email at foodforthoughtcmc@gmail.com.